This isn't just a story about stolen money. It's a story about a vanishing act that defied imagination. When Baghdad fell in 2003, the world watched statues of Saddam Hussein dragged through the streets, his palaces looted, his empire collapsing overnight. But in the shadows of that chaos, something far more staggering disappeared. An estimated $65 billion in cash, gold, and assets evaporating into the desert winds. From convoys of trucks loaded with shrink-wrapped bricks of U.S. currency to underground vaults hidden beneath marble palaces, Saddam's fortune was as vast as it was mysterious. Soldiers stumbled upon rooms stacked to the ceiling with $100 bills, yet those caches were just a fraction of the wealth that should have been there. How does an entire nation's treasure vanish in plain sight? Who carried it off? Family loyalists, foreign mercenaries, or governments pretending not to see? And why, decades later, do intelligence files remain sealed, witnesses silenced, trails deliberately blurred? This isn't just missing money, it's missing power. And in the ruins of a fallen dictator's empire, the hunt for Saddam's billions became a global obsession, one that still haunts the Middle East today. Saddam Hussein was many things at once: a dictator, a showman, a survivor, and above all, a man obsessed with control. To his people, he projected the image of a fatherly protector, smiling in staged parades, tossing candy to children and promising endless prosperity. Yet behind the curtains of his marble palaces, that same man orchestrated purges, torture chambers, and secret executions with a signature pen stroke. He lived in paradox. While Iraq's streets crumbled under sanctions and families rationed food, Saddam imported Italian marble bathtubs, $5,000 refrigerators, and hand-stitched French suits. He built golden thrones and underground bunkers in the same breath, a ruler who craved both opulence and security. At one dinner, he served roasted lamb and rare French wine. At another, he demanded his guards taste every dish, terrified of poison. And yet money alone never defined Saddam. It was power and the illusion of permanence. He treated wealth as both weapon and shield. With billions siphoned from Iraq's oil reserves, he bought loyalty at home and influence abroad. Suitcases of cash were delivered to tribal chiefs, generals, even Western businessmen. Everyone had a price, and Saddam always paid in cash. But it wasn't just the scale of his fortune that stunned investigators. It was the way he disguised it. Palaces across Iraq doubled as vaults. Beneath the chandeliers of Al-Faw Palace, secret rooms brimmed with dollars wrapped tight in plastic. His sprawling network of villas and safe houses concealed gold bars stamped with foreign seals. And through offshore accounts in Switzerland, Jordan, and Panama, Saddam moved money invisibly, long before anyone in Baghdad imagined the regime would collapse. Yet perhaps the strangest detail of all was how ordinary he could appear while orchestrating this empire of fear and wealth. Witnesses recall him sitting in simple sandals, smoking a cheap cigarette, and scribbling notes on yellow pads. Minutes later, he might order the execution of a rival minister, or sign a decree moving millions from Iraq's oil for food program into his private reserves. It was this duality that defined him, a dictator who looked at times almost like a weary grandfather, yet one who stockpiled billions while children starved outside his palace gates. He was not merely a man hoarding riches. He was a man building a fortress of cash, certain it would outlive him, certain that when history tried to erase him, his fortune would remain. And for a time it seemed unstoppable. His vaults overflowed, his relatives grew fat with stolen wealth, his network of bankers and smugglers stretched across continents. Yet the cracks were already forming. Whispers of betrayal, secret deals, and hidden movements of cash foreshadowed what would come when the empire finally collapsed. Because when the statues fell, when Baghdad burned, when the world thought Saddam's power had ended, his fortune had already begun to vanish, not with the noise of bombs, but with the quiet shuffle of convoys slipping into the desert night. And so the question began to form: was the money stolen from him, or had he planned its disappearance all along? April 2003, Baghdad was burning. American tanks rolled through the capital, and the regime that had ruled Iraq for decades crumbled in less than a month. For the world, it was the spectacle of liberation. For Iraqis, it was chaos, fear, and revenge. And for those in Saddam's inner circle, it was something else entirely: opportunity. Even as the cameras focused on U.S. Marines toppling Saddam's statue in Firdos Square, convoys of trucks moved silently through the night. They weren't carrying troops or refugees. They were carrying cash. Shrink-wrapped bundles of $100 bills stacked floor to ceiling in armored vehicles. Witnesses later claimed some convoys slipped across the Syrian border, others vanished into the Anbar Desert. No receipts, no witnesses, just a disappearing river of green. 5 p.m. The central bank in Baghdad is stormed, not by soldiers but by men in suits flashing regime badges. They load trucks with crates, each crate weighing nearly 40 pounds, each containing millions in U.S. currency. By the time the looting ends, nearly $1 billion in cash is gone in a single afternoon. Officials later insist it was Saddam's sons, Uday and Qusay, who ordered the withdrawal. Some say it was for the resistance. Others whisper it was their personal escape fund. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning. Weeks earlier, Saddam had already sensed the tide turning. U.S. forces were massing on the Kuwaiti border, and intelligence leaks suggested the war was inevitable. At night, inside his Tikrit stronghold, Saddam met with loyal aides and family members. The topic was not survival, it was money. Reports from defectors suggest he ordered billions moved out of Iraq before the first bombs fell. Suitcases of cash delivered to Damascus, gold bars smuggled to Beirut, oil vouchers, special contracts allowing the buyer to purchase Iraqi oil at discounted prices, handed out like favors to businessmen and politicians across the globe. It was wealth turned into leverage, cash transformed into silence. But betrayal crept in fast. Generals fled. Ministers disappeared. Men who once kissed Saddam's hand suddenly bargained with coalition forces for immunity. And with each betrayal, another piece of the financial empire splintered. The palaces, once symbols of untouchable power, became treasure hunts for invading soldiers. Marines walked through marble halls, only to stumble upon duffel bags stuffed with $100 bills, hidden behind false walls or beneath dusty rugs. Still, these discoveries were fragments, millions here, millions there, when investigators knew billions had vanished. Where was the rest? 7:30 a.m., May 2003. A raid on one of Saddam's safe houses in Baghdad uncovers $650 million in cash, neatly stacked in aluminum trunks. Soldiers pose for photos with the piles, grinning like they've just won a casino jackpot. But again, questions loom. If one house could hold more than $500 million, how many other houses had already been emptied before U.S. troops arrived? And who emptied them? Some pointed to Saddam's relatives, still on the run. Others to corrupt officials now dealing with the Americans. But darker suspicions arose that coalition forces themselves, or private contractors hired in the chaos, had taken part in siphoning the fortune away. After all, in a country where billions moved with no paper trail, who could prove where the money ended up? What's undeniable is this: the collapse of Saddam's Iraq wasn't just a military defeat. It was a financial gold rush. And in that rush, The dictators meticulously hoarded fortune scattered like coins spilled from a broken chest. By summer, Baghdad's banks were husks. Vaults stood open, their contents gone. Rumors swirled of entire shipments of US dollars flown into Iraq for reconstruction, only to vanish again on the tarmac. Some locals claimed they saw trucks burying metal containers deep in the desert, never to be recovered. The truth was slipping away in real time, erased by chaos. And as Iraq descended into looting, insurgency, and civil war, the missing billions became more than a mystery. They became fuel. Cash bought weapons, loyalty, and silence. It funded militias, rebuilt smuggling networks, and turned former Ba'athist loyalists into shadow warlords. For Saddam, now a fugitive moving from farmhouse to farmhouse, the money represented his last weapon. For the coalition, it was a gaping wound in the narrative of order restored. And for the world, it posed the question that still lingers. How does $65 billion vanish into thin air? December 13, 2003, Ad Dower near Tikrit. The night air was cold, tense, and heavy with silence. A U.S. Special Forces unit, codenamed Task Force 121, encircled a farmhouse. For months, intelligence had been chasing whispers, informants who changed their stories, captured aides who betrayed their master under duress. Now they believed Saddam Hussein himself was hiding here. The soldiers swept through the farmhouse, empty, no sign of the dictator, but behind a pile of rubble in the yard an odd-looking hole caught their attention. A concrete lid, a vent pipe sticking up, a spider hole. One of the soldiers yanked open the cover and shined a flashlight inside. The beam revealed a disheveled man, bearded and gaunt, crouched in the dirt. His face, once plastered across statues and portraits in every Iraqi city, now smeared with mud and sweat. His eyes narrowed against the light. Saddam Hussein, the Lion of Babylon, the man who built golden palaces and commanded an army of 1 million men, dragged out of a hole in the ground like a fugitive rat. But here's the detail that stunned the world. Inside the spider hole were not crates of gold, nor stacks of cash. Just a pistol, a few snacks, and 2 rifles. The dictator who once controlled $65 billion in assets had been reduced to hiding in a 6-foot hole with nothing. The symbolism was almost too neat. But for U.S. investigators, it raised a darker irony. If the money wasn't with him, where was it? 5:45 a.m. the farmhouse was searched top to bottom. Soldiers found $750,000 in crisp U.S. notes, hidden in a suitcase. To ordinary men, a fortune. To Saddam, pocket change. Analysts knew it wasn't the treasure they were hunting. It was survival cash, the kind of money needed to bribe drivers, feed guards, keep safe houses stocked. The larger treasure, the billions, was still missing. As news of Saddam's capture ricocheted across the globe, journalists fixated on his pathetic downfall. The dictator's once impeccable grooming, his dyed black hair, pressed suits, polished shoes, was gone. His teeth were rotting, his fingernails untrimmed. The contrast was shocking. Saddam, who once dined on imported French delicacies under crystal chandeliers, now gnawed stale bread in the dark. But investigators weren't interested in humiliation. They wanted answers, and they pushed him hard. In an interrogation room lit by a single hanging bulb, Saddam was asked, "Where is the money?" He smirked, he denied, he deflected. Some interrogators swore he even laughed when pressed about billions, as if the question itself was beneath him. Or perhaps he found it amusing that the Americans could topple his regime but not trace his fortune. Meanwhile, across Iraq, more caches were uncovered. $23 million hidden inside the walls of a palace. Gold bars smuggled through Jordan, intercepted at checkpoints. A farmer who stumbled upon a buried container in the desert, packed with neatly bound stacks of dollars. Each discovery made headlines. Each looked like a breakthrough, but collectively they were crumbs, nowhere near the billions intelligence reports insisted had vanished. 7 p.m. a convoy raid outside Baghdad uncovered yet another cache, $2 million in U.S. currency and dozens of Kalashnikov rifles. Again, survival money. Again, pocket change. The billions. They were gone, already laundered, already transformed into power somewhere else. And here lies the chilling reality. As Saddam rotted in a holding cell, his money may have already been buying influence across the Middle East. Reports emerged of Syrian banks suddenly flush with unexplained reserves, of Lebanese businessmen expanding overnight, of Russian intermediaries funneling funds through Cyprus. It was as if Saddam's empire had dissolved in geography but survived in finance. The Americans pressed harder. They questioned his bodyguards, his cousins, his mistresses. Some admitted they had couriered suitcases across borders. Others insisted Saddam's sons had hidden billions before their deaths in Mosul. One rumor even claimed cargo planes loaded with shrink-wrapped cash flew out of Baghdad in the war's final hours, escorted by military convoys. The stories contradicted each other, but all had one thing in common: the money was gone. And yet, what investigators couldn't find in hard evidence, they found in irony. The man who had hoarded unimaginable wealth was reduced to a prisoner shaving in front of U.S. guards, his dignity stripped away. He once ruled with portraits in every home. Now his mugshot, with tangled beard and lifeless eyes, became the only image the world remembered. In court, as he faced charges of crimes against humanity, prosecutors never mentioned the billions. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about justice, or vengeance. The dictator who built palaces lined with Italian marble and Austrian crystal chandeliers was sentenced to die not as a billionaire, but as a broken man. December 30, 2006, Baghdad. Saddam was led to the gallows at dawn. His executioners taunted him. His last words vanished into chaos. Minutes later, his body swung lifeless. The trial was over. His life was over. But the money, the billions, remained in the wind. And that silence was deafening. By the time Saddam was dead, one truth had become undeniable. His financial empire had been designed not for one man, but for survival beyond him. It had seeped into foreign accounts, secret trusts, shell companies, and the hands of people who would never admit to holding it. The treasure wasn't buried in a desert chest. It was alive, moving, hidden in plain sight. And that left investigators with one final, haunting realization. The dictator may have died, but his money never would. Today, Saddam's palaces are relics. Some stand abandoned, their marble cracked and fountains dry. Others have been converted into military bases or government offices. The opulence remains in fragments, gilded ceilings above soldiers, bunks, crystal chandeliers swinging over conference tables. But the man who built them is gone, and the billions that sustained them are still missing. The irony is suffocating. The United States spent trillions of dollars invading Iraq, toppling Saddam and rebuilding what the war destroyed. Yet the dictator's own hidden fortune, money that could have funded Iraq's recovery, money that belonged to the people, vanished into the shadows. It is a reminder that in war, even when dictators fall, corruption often outlives them. Whispers still circulate. Some claim Saddam's relatives in Jordan and Syria live quietly on slices of the fortune. Others point to Dubai, where luxury properties were purchased under suspicious trusts. Intelligence analysts speak of ghost accounts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Cyprus. always one step beyond legal reach, shielded by layers of secrecy. And then there is the darker possibility that much of the money was never stolen away by loyalists at all, but siphoned off by foreign powers during the chaos of war. Convoys loaded with shrink-wrapped bricks of US dollars rolled across Iraq in 2003. Some vanished. Some were lost. Some were simply absorbed. The paper trail evaporated in smoke. For ordinary Iraqis, the missing billions are more than numbers. They are a wound. They are hospitals never rebuilt, electricity that still fails in the summer heat, schools that crumble while oil wealth leaves the country. Each rumor of hidden fortune is a reminder of what was stolen from them, not just by Saddam, but by everyone who allowed the money to slip away. And so the myth lives on. Somewhere, perhaps in a vault beneath the desert or an offshore account under an assumed name, Saddam's ghost fortune still lurks, not just as missing money but as missing justice. The dictator died in 2006, swinging from a rope. His body was buried, his image was toppled, but his wealth, billions that could have changed a nation's fate, remains untouchable. In the end, Saddam Hussein lost his empire, his power, his life. But the fortune he scattered into the shadows became something more powerful than money. It became a legend, a reminder that dictators may fall into the dirt, yet their ghosts linger in the numbers we cannot trace and the billions we cannot see. And so the hunt goes on.